What if I told you that some of the most creative dishes in history were born out of desperation? Imagine a time when families had to feed 6 or 7 people with whatever they could grow in their backyard or scrape together from the pantry. There were no supermarket aisles overflowing with options, no food delivery apps, and no extra money to splurge. Yet, from that struggle came recipes so inventive, so unusual, that many people today have never even heard of them. These weren't just meals, they were survival strategies, passed from kitchen to kitchen during one of the hardest periods in American history, the Great Depression. Before we step back into the kitchens of the 1930s, make sure you hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps keep stories like these alive, and who knows, you might even find yourself inspired to try one of these forgotten recipes for yourself. The Great Depression changed the way Americans ate. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and many foods we take for granted today were simply too expensive. Families learned to stretch every ingredient to its limit, turning simple staples into hearty meals. They reused leftovers, substituted expensive items with cheaper alternatives, and often relied on home gardens or foraging to fill the gaps. In the process, they created a collection of dishes that reflect not only the hardship of the time, but also the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Some of these recipes may sound strange to modern ears, but back then, they were the difference between going hungry and having something warm to eat. Let's explore 20 Depression-era foods that have almost completely vanished from the family table. 1. Hoover stew. Named after President Herbert Hoover, who many blamed for the economic collapse, Hoover stew became a go-to meal for struggling families. The recipe varied depending on what you had on hand, but the basics were macaroni or other pasta, canned tomatoes, canned corn, and sliced hot dogs or another inexpensive meat. The pasta was boiled until soft, the vegetables and meat were added, and the whole thing simmered together in one big pot. It was cheap, filling, and could feed a crowd. Leftovers were often reheated for lunch the next day, sometimes with extra water or broth to make it stretch even further. Some families even tossed in beans, peas, or bits of onion if they had them, turning the pot into a true catch-all for whatever was in the pantry. In neighborhoods where families looked out for one another, Hoover stew might be cooked in a big batch and shared with a neighbor down the street. For many kids growing up in the 1930s, it was one of the few warm meals they could count on, a reminder of both hardship and the generosity of community. 2. Mock apple pie. This is one of the most famous examples of Depression-era ingenuity. Apples weren't always affordable, and canned fruit wasn't always available. So home cooks came up with a clever substitute, Ritz crackers. The crackers were layered in a pie crust with sugar, cinnamon, and cream of tartar, which added a tangy, fruity flavor. Once baked, the crackers softened and took on a texture remarkably similar to cooked apples. The result? A pie that tasted surprisingly authentic, even without a single slice of fruit. It fooled more than a few guests at the dinner table, and kids often didn't realize until years later that they'd been eating a pie made of crackers. Mock apple pie became a symbol of resourcefulness, proof that even in hard times, people found ways to enjoy a treat. Families sometimes made it for Sunday dinners or holidays, saving up their precious crackers just for the occasion. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filling the kitchen brought a rare sense of comfort, even if the apples were just an illusion. 3. Cornmeal, mush cornmeal. Mush was a staple in many rural households. Made from cornmeal boiled in water or milk, it was served hot like porridge for breakfast, often sweetened with syrup, honey, or molasses if available. If there were leftovers, they were poured into a pan, left to cool and solidify, and then sliced and fried for dinner or supper. Cornmeal was cheap, easy to store, and filling, exactly what families needed when money was tight. It was one of those foods that could be eaten at any time of day and was simple enough for even the youngest family members to help prepare. Many kids remember standing on a stool, stirring the pot slowly to keep the mush from lumping. When fried, the slices developed a crispy crust with a soft, creamy inside, a texture that made it comforting and satisfying. Served with gravy, milk, or even just a pat of butter, cornmeal. Fourth, dandelion salad. When fresh produce was too expensive, people turned to nature for free ingredients. Dandelion greens, often considered weeds today, were a nutritious and readily available choice. Families would pick young dandelion leaves from fields and backyards, wash them thoroughly, and toss them with vinegar, salt, and sometimes a bit of bacon grease for flavor. The result was a slightly bitter, tangy salad packed with vitamins. Foraging like this wasn't just a hobby, it was a survival skill. Many children of the Depression grew up learning exactly which wild plants could be eaten and how to prepare them. In some towns, gathering greens was a family outing, with parents teaching children how to identify the youngest, most tender leaves before they grew tough and bitter. The salad might be paired with cornbread or boiled eggs if the family had them, turning a handful of weeds into a surprisingly satisfying meal. 5. Vinegar pie. Vinegar pie might sound odd, but it was a clever solution to the lack of fresh fruit. Made with vinegar, sugar, butter, and eggs, it had a custard-like texture with a sweet tart flavor that mimicked fruit pies. The vinegar gave it just enough acidity to balance the sweetness, making it a satisfying dessert when apples, berries, and other fruits were out of reach. For many families, a slice of vinegar pie was a rare treat, a reminder that even during dark times, life could still have a little sweetness. In some variations, a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg was added to give it more depth, and the pie was often served warm to make it feel even more comforting. It was especially popular in rural communities where vinegar was a common pantry staple, and it sometimes became the dessert of choice for church gatherings or community suppers. One bite could transport you, just for a moment, away from the worries of the day. 6. Potato pancakes. Potatoes were a Depression-era hero, cheap, filling, and incredibly versatile. Potato pancakes were made by grating raw potatoes, mixing them with flour, eggs, and seasoning, then frying them until crispy. They could be served with applesauce, sour cream, or simply eaten plain. These pancakes were especially popular in immigrant households, where similar recipes had been passed down from European ancestors. In some homes, they were made entirely without eggs if they were too expensive, relying on just flour and water to bind the potatoes together. Some thrifty cooks even added leftover mashed potatoes from the previous night's dinner to stretch the batter further, ensuring that nothing went to waste. They were often fried in lard or bacon drippings, which added rich flavor without the need for expensive oils. Families loved them because they could be served at breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they were hearty enough to satisfy even the hungriest bellies. In a time when every penny mattered, potato pancakes were the kind of comfort food that brought a little normalcy to the table. 7. Boiled carrot sandwich. This unusual creation came about when meat became a rare luxury. Carrots were boiled until soft, then mashed with butter, mayonnaise, or even a little sugar, and spread between slices of bread. It wasn't glamorous, but it was nutritious and affordable. Kids might not have loved it, but parents appreciated any recipe that could fill their children's stomachs without draining their food budget. For some, the boiled carrot sandwich was a daily lunch, a reminder of how far people would go to make something from very little. Some thrifty homemakers seasoned the mash with a pinch of salt and pepper, or even a splash of vinegar to give it more depth. If they had access to garden-fresh carrots, the flavor was sweeter and brighter, making the sandwich a bit more appealing. For those living in farming communities, Carrots were easy to grow, store, and preserve, so they became a dependable base for meals. The carrot sandwich might never win a gourmet award, but during the Depression, it was a quiet hero on countless lunch plates. 8. Prune pudding. Prunes, being dried, lasted much longer than fresh fruit and were less expensive than many other options. Prune pudding was made by stewing prunes until soft, mashing them, and mixing them with sugar, spices, and a thickener, like cornstarch or breadcrumbs. It was served warm or chilled, sometimes with a dollop of whipped cream if you were lucky. This dessert may not have been a favorite for children, but it was high in fiber and could be made in large batches, making it a practical choice for big families. Many home cooks added a sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg to make it smell and taste more inviting. In some communities, prune pudding even became a potluck dessert, shared at church gatherings or community suppers when other ingredients were scarce. While it might not have been as exciting as fresh fruit pie, it had a sweetness and comfort all its own, a reminder that even the humblest ingredients could be transformed into something special with a little creativity. 9. Egg drop soup. Egg drop soup was quick, simple, and nourishing. Water or broth was brought to a boil, and beaten eggs were drizzled in slowly, cooking instantly into delicate ribbons. A bit of seasoning, leftover vegetables, or even scraps of meat could be added for flavor. This dish was a perfect example of how 1 or 2 eggs could be transformed into a meal for an entire family. It was warm, comforting, and easy to make even when supplies were low. Some households would stretch it even further by serving it over rice or noodles, turning a thin soup into a more filling main dish. Garlic, green onions, or a dash of pepper could elevate the flavor, but even plain, it offered a satisfying warmth. For many families, it became a go-to on cold nights or when illness struck, since it was both gentle on the stomach and easy to prepare. 10. Cabbage and noodles. Also known as haluski in some Eastern European immigrant households, cabbage and noodles combined boiled egg noodles with sautéed cabbage and onions. Cooked in butter or bacon fat, it was simple but surprisingly flavorful. Cabbage was inexpensive, stored well, and could bulk up any meal, making it a Depression-era favorite. This dish was often served as a main course, but it could also be stretched further by serving it alongside bread or soup. Many families who had access to home gardens grew their own cabbage, making this dish nearly cost-free. In colder months, when fresh vegetables were scarce, a head of cabbage could be stored in a root cellar for weeks, ready to be turned into a satisfying meal at a moment's notice. Some cooks would sprinkle a little black pepper or paprika over the top for extra flavor, while others relied on the smoky richness of bacon fat to make it irresistible. Creamed corn sandwich. The creamed corn sandwich is a nostalgic reminder of comfort food from simpler times. This sandwich features creamed corn spread on buttered bread. The creamy sweet corn provides a comforting taste, making it a popular choice during times when ingredients were limited. Spread the creamed corn generously on slices of bread to create a hearty and flavorful sandwich. This dish reflects an era when homemade simplicity was highly valued. The creamed corn sandwich continues to be a comforting option for those who enjoy the flavors of classic American comfort food, offering a taste of a bygone era. Monte Cristo sandwich. The Monte Cristo sandwich is a classic American dish that gained popularity in the mid-20th century. It's an egg-dipped or batter-dipped ham and cheese sandwich that is pan or deep-fried, often considered a variation of the French croque monsieur. The sandwich can be savory or a mix of savory and sweet, sometimes covered in powdered sugar and served with maple syrup or preserves. Its rise in popularity is partly attributed to being served at Disneyland's Blue Bayou restaurant. Macaroni and cheese loaf sandwich. Transport yourself back to mid-20th century America, where comfort food took on a new form. The classic sandwich. Think of slices of macaroni and cheese loaf, a delightful combination of pasta and ham shaped into a loaf-like product. Layered between bread with mustard or mayonnaise, this intriguing dish made its debut in the 1950s, becoming a unique addition to the American sandwich repertoire. Imagine families gathering around tables, savoring this peculiar yet beloved creation. Chips or pickles often accompany this culinary delight, adding an extra layer of flavor. Velveeta fudge. Velveeta fudge is not a myth, but a very real dessert that graced tables across America. The star ingredient is that familiar processed cheese brick found in countless refrigerators. The logic behind this unusual combination? Velveeta is soft, salty, and melts perfectly. When combined with cocoa powder, butter, and powdered sugar, it creates a rich, creamy texture remarkably similar to traditional fudge. Skeptics became believers after tasting it. Once melted and mixed, the cheese's flavor disappears completely, leaving behind deeply chocolatey, ultra-smooth fudge with a subtle, salty edge. During times when fresh dairy was expensive or difficult to store, Velveeta offered a practical alternative that didn't require refrigeration until after preparation. This recipe became a cherished family secret, passed down through generations with the caveat, just try it before you judge it. The unexpected marriage of processed cheese and chocolate demonstrates the creative problem-solving that characterized mid-century American cooking, finding new uses for everyday ingredients to create something surprisingly delicious. Sardine sandwich. The sandwich that cleared a 3-foot radius around you. Tinned sardines mashed with mayonnaise on white bread, sometimes with a squeeze of lemon if your parents were fancy. The smell announced your lunch before you did. Kids would dramatically hold their noses, but secretly, some were jealous of your sophisticated palate. The oily fish would soak into the bread, making the whole thing a soft, savory experience that you either loved or hated. There was an unspoken hierarchy to sardine sandwiches. The basic version had just the fish and mayo. The intermediate version included finely diced onions or celery for texture, and the elite version featured capers or chopped pickles that added briny pops of flavor. The sardine sandwich revealed your family's economic philosophy. Some saw it as a protein-packed, affordable option, while others viewed it as a delicacy worth the premium price of imported fish. The best versions had the sardines mashed just enough to create a spread while leaving some recognizable pieces for textural interest. By mid-morning, the sandwich would have fully matured, with the flavors melting together and the oils penetrating the bread to create a unified culinary experience. Cheese and jelly sandwich. The poor man's cheesecake. Cream cheese spread thick on white bread with a layer of grape jelly. The sweet and tangy combination was a revelation before fancy flavor combinations were cool. It was like having dessert for lunch, and sometimes the cream cheese would melt just enough to mix with the jelly, creating marble swirls that looked as good as they tasted. The bread would get a little soggy, but that was part of the charm. Opening your lunchbox to find this sandwich meant your parent had taken extra time that morning, as spreading cold cream cheese on soft bread required patience and finesse. If spread too roughly, the bread would tear, resulting in a patchwork sandwich that tasted the same but lost aesthetic points. Different jelly flavors created different experiences. Grape was classic and assertive. Strawberry added a hint of sophistication, and the rare exotic flavors like apricot or blackberry meant your family had recently visited a farmer's market or fancy hat. The sandwich's appearance would transform throughout the morning. By lunchtime, the jelly would partially absorb into both the cream cheese and bread, creating a graduated color effect that was visually striking. In winter months, the cold classroom would keep the cream cheese firm, while in warmer seasons, it would develop a soft, almost frosting-like consistency. Egg drop soup. Egg drop soup appears in countless vintage cookbooks as a kindless comfort dish once prepared in nearly every American kitchen. This recipe, originally tucked between yellowed pages of grandmother's handwritten collections, represents culinary wisdom nearly lost to time. In those dog-eared cookbooks from generations past, instructions detailed how to transform humble ingredients into something remarkable by whisking eggs into a simmering broth, creating silky ribbons that danced through the golden liquid. The instructions were charmingly imprecise. A pot of broth heated until steam rises, with eggs added in a thin stream, while stirring gently to achieve the characteristic delicate texture. The result was a soup that combined the rustic simplicity of farm-fresh eggs with carefully crafted broths that simmered for hours. Often, handwritten notes and margins suggested additions. These 25 forgotten poor man meals tell a story far bigger than just food. They're about resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to make something wonderful out of almost nothing. Our grandparents didn't have convenience stores on every corner or takeout apps at their fingertips. They had gardens, scraps, and the determining. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more nostalgic recipes and frugal living tips. And let me know in the comments, which of these meals have you tried, and which ones are you excited to bring back to your kitchen? Until next time, keep cooking with love and a little old-fashioned ingenuity.